"Stop your trespassing." The shout cut through the quiet morning. An old man paused, one hand on his white cane, the other on his loyal guide dog's harness. He didn't hear the fear in that voice, only the cold snap of panic. A taser cracked in the air, striking the dog down in an instant. The old man fell too, confusion and pain twisting through the silence. Chaos erupted across the street, exactly 15 minutes later. Military vehicles sealed off the block, every inch held tight in olive drab and quiet authority. A four-star general stepped from the lead vehicle, his gaze steady, his voice calm but resolute. Who was responsible for this? Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The morning air was crisp in Asheville, North Carolina. Early light spilled across Main Street, touching the neat brick buildings and the hum of a city already at work. Emily Adams watched it all from the window of the coffee shop, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee. The usual crowd moved in a steady flow suits on their way to offices. Kids with backpacks slung low, cyclists weaving past the crosswalks. A gentle quiet hung in the air, punctuated by the buzz of electric scooters zipping down the street. It was the kind of morning Emily liked best, unhurried, calm, almost gentle in its routine. Across the street, she spotted him, Samuel "Sam" Bell, a familiar figure in town, old, stooped, but with a dignity that never wavered. At 78, Sam moved with deliberate care, his white cane sweeping the path in front of him. Beside him walked Guy, his black Labrador guide dog, wearing a bright vest that said service animal. Emily had seen them many mornings, always the same slow, patient pace. Sam was a veteran, though few people knew the details. He'd served in wars most had forgotten, in places no one bothered to remember. Now he moved through this quiet American town with nothing more than the memory of those distant battles and the dog that never left his side. Emily often wondered what it was like for him navigating a world he couldn't see. He'd lost his sight decades ago, a battle wound that never fully healed. But he carried it without complaint, and there was something in that quiet resilience that Emily respected deeply. This morning, though, was different. The city had been digging up part of Main Street all week. A construction crew had blocked Sam's usual route, forcing him to take an unfamiliar path. Emily watched as he and Guy turned down a narrow sidewalk that skirted the edge of Central Financial Plaza. It was a sleek, modern building, glass walls and steel doors, with security cameras at every corner. A place that felt sterile and unwelcoming, even to someone with perfect vision. Sam didn't seem to notice. He couldn't see the no trespassing signs posted along the iron fence. They were too high, too small, and to him meaningless in the darkness he lived in. Guy guided him carefully along the edge of the building, the dog's harness taut as they navigated the unfamiliar ground. Emily pressed her hand to the window, feeling a flicker of worry she couldn't quite name. She'd never seen Sam veer from his path before. She watched as they moved closer to the side entrance of the plaza. A young security guard, no more than 20, maybe 21, stood by the door, hands fidgeting nervously on his belt. Emily didn't know his name, but she knew the look in his eyes. Eager, unsure, the kind of kid who took rules very seriously because he didn't know any better. Sam and Guy didn't slow down. The dog paused, sniffed the air, then tugged Sam gently forward again. To Guy, it was just another turn in the road, but to the guard, it must have looked like something else entirely. Emily could almost see the moment the guard stiffened. His hand dropped to his belt, fingers brushing the handle of the taser clipped there. She felt her own chest tighten as she leaned closer to the glass. Sam kept walking, oblivious to the alarm on the guard's face. His hearing wasn't what it used to be. Emily knew that much. Old injuries from his time in uniform had left him with a constant hum in his ears, a kind of silence that never went away. The guard shouted something, a sharp, nervous bark of command that cut across the quiet morning. Emily couldn't make out the words, but she saw how Sam hesitated just for a moment. Guy turned his head, ears flicking back, but Sam didn't stop. Emily's pulse quickened. She pressed her forehead to the window, willing the scene to slow down, to make sense. She knew Sam wasn't a threat to anyone, but the guard didn't know Sam. All he saw was an old man and a big black dog moving straight toward a door marked "Staff Only." The dog's leash tightened as Guy tried to steer Sam back. But Sam, confused, took another step forward, his white cane tapping uselessly against the smooth concrete. To Emily, it was a moment of heartbreaking innocence. To the guard, it must have looked like defiance. She watched as the guard's face went pale. His lips moved again, another order, more urgent this time. But Sam didn't flinch. He couldn't hear it. Or maybe he didn't understand it. No one had ever spoken to him that way before. Emily saw the guard's hand drop to the taser at his side. She wanted to scream at him, to pound on the glass, to make him see the truth. But before she could move, the air cracked with the sudden hiss of electricity. The taser's prongs flew across the small gap, striking the dog squarely in the side. Guy yelped in shock and pain, his body jerking as the charge hit. Sam stumbled, his hand losing grip on the harness, his cane clattering to the ground. Emily gasped, her breath fogging the window as the scene blurred in her eyes. The old man crumpled to his knees, one hand reaching out blindly for his dog. Guy whined, trying to crawl to his side, but the tremors in his muscles kept him pinned. On the sidewalk, people stopped. Phones came out recording, always recording. A woman near the curb let out a sharp cry of protest. Emily couldn't hear the words, but she saw the anger in her face. She saw it in the guard's face too, his sudden, horrible understanding of what he'd done. The taser still clicked softly in his hand, but his shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him. The city seemed to hold its breath, the usual morning rhythm broken by the sound of an old man's ragged breathing. Emily stepped back from the window, her own heart thudding in her chest. In that quiet coffee shop, she felt the weight of something much bigger than a simple morning gone wrong. She felt the weight of all the mornings that had come before, all the quiet dignity of a man who never asked for anything, and she knew somehow that everything had just changed. Emily's hands were still pressed to the cold window, her breath fogging the glass as she watched Sam and Guy struggle to rise. Sam reached out, his hand brushing the slick sidewalk as he tried to find his cane. His other hand searched for Guy, his fingers trembling with each blind reach. Guy whimpered, a low, pained sound that cut through the morning quiet. The dog's hind leg twitched with the aftershocks of the taser, but he still tried to crawl back to Sam's side. Emily felt her throat tighten as she watched the old man's quiet dignity crumple under the weight of that single, terrible mistake. Brian West, the young security guard, stood frozen, the taser still clutched in his hand. His face was pale, eyes wide with the realization of what he'd done. He took a small step back, his lips parting as if to apologize, but no words came out. Emily could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers curled tighter around the taser's grip. He looked at Sam and Guy, an old man on his knees, a dog trembling with pain, and for a moment, his confidence evaporated. He hadn't meant for it to go this far. Sam managed to grip the harness, pulling Guy close with a shaky breath. He didn't say a word, he just held on, his shoulders hunched forward, head bowed. It was as if he was gathering the last of his strength, willing himself not to collapse completely. The sidewalk around them was no longer quiet. People had stopped, some pulling out their phones, others just staring in shocked silence. Emily watched as a woman in a red coat stepped forward, her voice cutting through the stillness. "Why did you do that?" she shouted, her voice shaking. "He's blind. That's his service dog." Brian looked at her, then back at Sam, the taser slipping from his fingers and clattering onto the concrete. Sam didn't seem to hear the woman's voice. He was focused only on Guy, running a trembling hand over the dog's back, murmuring something Emily couldn't hear. Emily knew, even without hearing it, that it was a prayer, some small, silent promise to keep going. The air around them felt heavy, the kind of stillness that comes after a storm. Emily saw Brian swallow hard, his Adam's apple bobbing as he tried to find his voice. I thought he was lost," he stammered, his words thin and desperate. "I thought the dog was going to hurt him." Emily pressed her hand harder to the window, feeling her own heart racing. She wanted to believe Brian meant well, that he'd acted out of fear, not cruelty. But watching Sam kneeling there, she couldn't find it in herself to forgive so easily. Sam tried to push himself up, his hands slipping on the wet pavement. Guy whined again, his tail thumping weakly against the ground. Emily saw the effort in every movement, the sheer force of will it took for Sam to keep going. The young security guard took a hesitant step forward, his hands outstretched as if to help. But before he could reach Sam, the old man's head lifted, his sightless eyes turning toward the voice he couldn't see. There was no accusation in Sam's face, no anger, just a quiet, bone-deep exhaustion. Emily's chest ached as she watched him. This wasn't the first time Sam had been forced to navigate a world that didn't see him. It was just the first time it had come to this. A man in a dark business suit stepped forward from the crowd, his phone still held up. "Did you really think he was dangerous?" he said, his tone low, disbelieving. "He's blind. That dog is the only reason he can move at all." Brian's shoulders slumped, his face flushing with shame. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't know." Emily stepped back from the window, her hand falling to her side. The scene outside felt too big, too heavy to watch from behind glass. She pushed open the door of the coffee shop, stepping into the cool morning air. The sidewalk was slick with dew, the sun glinting off the wet concrete. Emily moved slowly toward the crowd, her own heart pounding in her chest. She felt each step like a weight, each breath like a question she didn't know how to answer. When she reached the edge of the crowd, she could see Sam more clearly. He was on his feet now, though he wavered slightly, one hand on Guy's harness. Guy leaned against him, his head low, but he stood steady beside his master. Brian stood a few feet away, his face pale and drawn. He looked like a man who'd just woken from a bad dream, shaken and unsteady. Emily watched him take a breath, his lips parting as he tried to find the right words. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't understand." Sam didn't respond. He just lifted his chin, his shoulders straightening as he took a slow, measured breath. Guy pressed closer, the tremors in his body finally easing, and together they stood in the middle of that silent circle of onlookers. The moment felt endless, each second stretching out until it was almost too much to bear. Emily felt her throat tighten, a lump she couldn't swallow down. This was what fear did, she thought. This was what happened when people forgot how to see each other. She saw a young woman in scrubs step forward, her hands outstretched. "Are you all right, sir?" she asked, her voice gentle, eyes bright with worry. Sam turned his head slightly, as if trying to place her voice. "I'm fine," he said quietly, the words slow and careful. "I just need to catch my breath." Emily's heart broke a little at the calm in his tone. Even here, even after this, Sam wouldn't let the world see him shaken. He had spent too many years learning how to stand tall no matter how hard the wind blew. Brian took another step forward, his hands still open, his voice pleading now. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I swear, I didn't mean to hurt him. I thought—" He trailed off, his shoulders sagging. Emily watched Sam's face, searching for some sign of forgiveness. But there was only that quiet, heavy calm. Sam reached down, fingers brushing Guy's head, and took a slow, steady breath. The crowd was still. The morning, so gentle only minutes before, felt weighted with something bigger than any of them. Emily felt it in her bones, the knowledge that some moments could never be undone. She took a step closer, her voice low and even. "Let's get him some help," she said softly, her hand brushing Sam's arm. Sam nodded once, his face turned toward her voice. "Thank you," he murmured, the words no louder than the whisper of the wind. Emily took his arm, guiding him gently away from the crowd. She could feel the tremble in his fingers, the strain in his breath. Guy moved with them, his steps slow but determined. As they walked, Emily felt the eyes of the city on them, Phones still up, faces still watching, but for once, it didn't feel invasive. It felt like witness, like the city itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This morning had started with the quiet shuffle of a man and his dog, and it had become something else entirely. Emily's hand still rested on Sam's arm as she guided him to a nearby bench, her voice a quiet anchor in the swirling confusion. Paramedics knelt beside him, checking his pulse, their faces drawn tight with worry. Guy lay at Sam's feet, head low, but his tail thumped once, a small sign of life. Emily felt the air shift around them. The murmur of the crowd grew louder, a low hum of voices that rose and fell in waves. Phones flashed, capturing every second, but no one seemed to know what to do next. Then, a new sound cut through the chaos, a deep, heavy rumble that seemed to vibrate through the pavement itself. Diesel engines, slow and deliberate, growing louder with each passing breath. Emily turned, her heart stuttering as she saw them. A line of olive drab Humvees rolled down the narrow street, their headlights cutting through the morning light. They moved with a calm precision that made the entire scene seem to pause, like the world itself was holding its breath. At the head of the convoy, a black SUV followed close behind, its windows tinted and its presence commanding. The Humvees came to a stop, one by one, blocking the intersection with quiet authority. The city's morning rhythm ground to a halt, the quiet hum of routine replaced by something older, something heavier. Emily watched as doors swung open and soldiers stepped out. Their movements were measured, deliberate, their uniforms crisp and their eyes scanning the crowd with cool focus. They didn't move with the rushed urgency of police or paramedics. This was something different. The rear door of the black SUV opened, and a man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dress uniform that caught the light like a quiet promise. His hair was close-cropped and silver at the temples, his face lined with age and experience. Emily felt a hush fall over the crowd as he moved forward. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His presence alone commanded respect. General Michael Vance. The name rippled through the crowd like a whisper, carried on the lips of those who recognized the weight it held. A four-star general, known for his quiet strength and unwavering loyalty. He walked with the calm confidence of a man who had seen every kind of chaos and learned how to stand tall in its center. His gaze swept over the scene, pausing on the paramedics, on the trembling form of Sam Bell, and finally on the young security guard who still stood frozen nearby. Emily watched Brian West's shoulders tense as the general's eyes settled on him. The young man looked impossibly small under that steady, unblinking stare. His mouth opened, but no words came out. General Vance stopped beside the paramedics, his expression softening as he looked down at Sam. His voice was quiet but carried easily, each word weighted with purpose. "Sergeant Samuel Bell," he said, his tone almost reverent. "Can you hear me?" Sir Sam lifted his head slowly, the lines of his face deepened by pain and confusion. His voice was a hoarse whisper. "General?" Recognition flickered in his sightless eyes, like a distant memory surfacing in the dark. General Vance's jaw tightened. He turned to the paramedics, his voice low but firm. "Is he stable?" One of them nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. We're monitoring him closely. He's conscious, but shaken." Vance nodded once, then shifted his gaze to Brian. The young guard swallowed hard, his face pale and drawn. "I didn't. I thought he was lost," Brian stammered, his voice cracking. "I thought the dog was going to hurt him." General Vance said nothing for a long moment. He let the silence stretch, heavy and unyielding, until Brian shifted uncomfortably under the weight of it. Then, his voice cut through the quiet like the edge of a blade. "You thought," he said softly, his words measured and calm. "You didn't see. You didn't ask. You reacted out of fear, fear of an old man who couldn't see you coming." Brian's shoulders slumped, his hands falling limp at his sides. "I'm sorry," he said again, the words barely a breath. "I didn't know." General Vance's gaze was cool and unwavering. "Not knowing isn't an excuse," he said, "especially when it costs someone their dignity or their safety." Emily felt the shift in the air, a hush settling over the crowd like a blanket. People lowered their phones, their expressions changing from curiosity to something deeper, something like respect. She could feel it in her bones, that quiet understanding of what it meant to witness a moment like this. Vance took a step closer to Brian, his voice dropping even lower. "You see that man," he said, gesturing to Sam, who still sat hunched on the bench, one hand on Guy's head. "He gave his sight for this country. He served so that you and I could stand here today, free to make mistakes and free to learn from them." Brian nodded, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry," he whispered again. "I didn't mean to hurt him." Vance took a slow breath, his shoulders rising and falling with the weight of it. He turned to the paramedics, his tone all business once more. "Get him to the hospital," he said. "Make sure he has everything he needs." One of the medics nodded, signaling to the driver of the waiting ambulance. As they moved to lift Sam onto the stretcher, Emily saw the old man's hand tighten around Guy's harness. The dog pressed close, his tail flicking once, a quiet reassurance that he was still there. Vance turned back to Brian, his expression softening just slightly. "Listen to me, son," he said quietly. "You made a mistake today, a big one. But what matters now is how you carry it, what you do next." Brian nodded, his chin trembling. "I understand." "Sir." Vance gave him one last, lingering look, then turned back to the crowd. His gaze swept over them, steady and unflinching. "Let this be clear to everyone here," he said, his voice ringing out over the square. "No one who has served this country will be forgotten. No one who has paid the price of freedom will be left to suffer alone." The words settled over the crowd like a vow, unspoken but absolute. Emily felt her own breath catch, her eyes stinging with the weight of it. Around her, she saw people nodding, their faces solemn, their postures straightening as if to honor the moment. As the paramedics wheeled Sam toward the waiting ambulance, General Vance stepped forward and laid a hand on the old man's shoulder. "You're not alone, Sergeant," he said softly, his voice low enough that only those closest could hear. "Not today. Not ever." Sam nodded once, his face turned toward the voice he knew so well. Emily watched the faintest smile ghost across the old man's lips, a flicker of gratitude, of quiet understanding. And in that moment, the city itself seemed to exhale, the weight of what had just happened settling into the bones of everyone who witnessed it. Emily knew she would remember this morning for the rest of her life. The way the engines rumbled like a heartbeat in the quiet. The way the general's calm presence had turned confusion into purpose. The way even the smallest voice when lifted in respect could shift the air around them. The morning had started like any other, but in the space of 7 minutes, everything had changed, and nothing would ever be the same. General Vance took a final look at the young security guard, his eyes steady but not unkind. He turned and spoke softly to one of his aides, who began making quiet, urgent phone calls. Emily could feel the air shifting again, the weight of authority settling in like the first snow of winter. "I expect the police chief and the mayor at the hospital within the hour," Vance said firmly, his voice carrying a quiet finality. "This will be handled with full transparency. The Department of Justice will be notified, and I will be overseeing this investigation personally." He paused, the words hanging in the air like a promise. "No one will be left behind in this." Brian West swallowed, his eyes wide, but he didn't look away. The crowd had grown silent once more. Each word from the general landing, like the beat of a slow, solemn drum. Emily stood among them, feeling the pulse of it in her own chest steady, unwavering. The paramedics moved quickly, lifting Sam onto the stretcher with practiced care. Guy pressed close to his master's side, his body trembling but his head held high. One of the medics reached down to soothe the dog, murmuring quiet words of reassurance. Emily's breath caught as she watched Sam's hand tighten on the dog's harness. Even now, through pain, through confusion, he clung to that connection, to the quiet, steadfast loyalty of a friend who had never let him walk alone. The ambulance doors swung open, the small space inside bright with sterile light. Sam's face turned briefly toward the sky, sightless eyes searching for something only he could see. Then the paramedics lifted him in, the stretcher rolling forward with a gentle finality. Emily stepped back, her hand brushing her cheek as the ambulance doors closed. For a moment, the world held still. Then the siren wailed, soft at first, then rising, carrying Sam and Guy away down the narrow street. She let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of the morning settle into her bones. The soldiers around her moved with quiet precision, guiding traffic, clearing the path as the convoy turned to follow the ambulance. They didn't need words. Their presence was enough a silent testament to the promise that had just been made. As the Humvees rolled out, Emily caught one last glimpse of General Vance standing beside the black SUV. His back was straight, his eyes following the ambulance as it disappeared around the corner. Then he turned, stepping into the vehicle without another word. The convoy rumbled away, engines low and deliberate, leaving the street quieter than it had been in hours. Emily stood there, feeling the cold morning air bite at her cheeks, her breath visible in the pale light. She thought of something Sam had once told her, in the warm hush of the coffee shop on a winter afternoon. "I can't see the world anymore," he'd said, his voice soft but sure, "but I still know when something important is happening." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, letting those words echo inside her. She turned back to the coffee shop, her footsteps slow on the wet pavement. The crowd was starting to drift apart, people lowering their phones, their conversations hushed. There was no shouting, no chaos now, just a quiet understanding that lingered like the memory of a song. Inside, she set her apron down and took a moment to breathe. Her reflection in the window was pale, eyes wide. But there was something else there too, something steady. She had watched a man who had lost so much still stand tall. She had seen fear and ignorance collide with patience and dignity. And she had seen what it meant for an entire city to be reminded of who they really were. Emily knew she wouldn't forget this day. Not the way the crowd had fallen silent when the soldiers arrived. Not the way Sam had reached for Guy even as the world closed in around him. Not the way General Vance's quiet authority had cut through confusion and replaced it with resolve. She glanced outside again, watching the last of the convoy disappear into the morning light. There was a kind of finality to it, but also a beginning, like the soft echo of a bell still ringing in the distance. Emily knew the real work was just starting. The quiet conversations that would ripple out from this moment, the small acts of understanding that would build something better than before. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved to pour a fresh cup of coffee. The city outside was already moving on cars humming, feet shuffling, the ordinary rhythm of a day reclaimed, but she carried the weight of that promise in her chest. The quiet, unwavering vow that no one would be forgotten. Somewhere across town, in a hospital room bright with morning sun, Sam Bell lay resting. Guy was there too, his head resting on the old man's knee, his tail thumping gently every time a nurse walked by. Emily liked to imagine it the way the dog would watch every movement, every gesture, as if guarding something too precious to name. In the days to come, there would be questions and statements, policies re-examined and apologies offered. There would be news reports and official inquiries. But in the quiet corners of the city, in the small conversations that mattered most, something deeper had already shifted. Emily understood now. It wasn't about headlines or press conferences. It was about seeing each other, truly seeing, beyond uniforms and titles, beyond fear and assumptions. It was about remembering that some debts could never be repaid, only honored. She poured another cup of coffee and watched the steam rise in the early light. Her reflection in the window looked back at her, a little older, a little wiser, but still steady. The morning had begun like any other, but it had ended as a quiet testament to dignity, to courage, and to the fierce loyalty of a dog who never left his master's side. And in that hush somewhere between the last echo of the siren and the first rustle of the day beginning again, Emily understood what Sam had always known. Even in the dark, some things never stop shining. And in that light, no one is ever truly left behind. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes, that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Grateful Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.